I never wanted to prove myself to anyone. That's what I told myself every time my husband's family looked at me like I didn't belong. But some people just can't help pushing until they find out exactly who they're dealing with. This is the story of one dinner, one smug question, and one answer that changed the way an entire family saw me forever. My name is Sarah, and I'm married into a family that loved to talk about service. My husband's father was a retired Army colonel. His older brother, Mark, was a Navy lieutenant, and he never let anyone forget it. Every family dinner turned into his personal stage. He'd talk about drills, about training, about how civilians couldn't understand real sacrifice. I usually just smiled and let it go. I wasn't the type to argue at the dinner table. But there was one thing about me that nobody in that family knew.
I never talked about my job.
I never brought it up. Not because I was hiding it, but because it wasn't something I flaunted. I let my work speak through my actions, not my words. That night, we were all gathered for family dinner to celebrate my father-in-law's birthday. The table was full. Aunts, cousins, old family friends. Mark walked in wearing his uniform, medals shining, clearly ready to remind everyone why he was the golden child of the family. Dinner started normal enough. Laughter, stories, the usual family noise. But as the night went on, Mark's tone shifted. He started talking about his deployments, exaggerating just enough to make himself sound like the hero of every story. Then his eyes landed on me. "So," he said, smirking, swirling his wine glass, "I heard you're in the Navy too."
Didn't know that.
His tone was already dripping with doubt. I nodded simply. "Yes, I am." He laughed, not in a friendly way, but in that condescending way people laugh when they've already decided you're beneath them. "Let me guess," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You've never even been on a real mission." The table went quiet. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My husband looked at me, unsure whether to jump in. But I stayed calm. I dealt with people like Mark before. Men who assumed that if you didn't brag, you didn't have anything to brag about. I simply said, "You'd be surprised." But he wasn't done. He wanted an audience. He wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone, to prove that his uniform meant something, and mine apparently didn't. That's when my father-in-law, sitting quietly at the head of the table, looked up from his plate. He hadn't said much all night, but something in his eyes told me he already knew more than he was letting on. He looked directly at me and asked one simple question. "What's your call sign?" The room went still. Mark's smirk faltered for just a second, like he hadn't expected his father to ask something like that. A call sign wasn't just a nickname. It was something earned, something given to you by your unit, based on your skill, your reputation, your missions. Civilians didn't get call signs. Only real operators did. I took a breath, feeling every eye at the table turn toward me. "Falcon," I said quietly. "They call me Falcon." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then my father-in-law's face changed completely. His eyes widened, and he set his fork down slowly, like he needed both hands to process what he just heard. "Wait," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "You're that Falcon? The pilot who ran combat search and rescue missions in the Middle East? I read about that operation in a classified briefing years ago." The table erupted into murmurs. My husband looked at me, stunned, because even he hadn't known the full details of my past deployments. I never talked about it. Not out of secrecy, but because I didn't need anyone's approval to feel proud of what I had done. Mark's face went pale. His smirk disappeared completely. He shifted in his seat, trying to find something to say, but nothing came out. My father-in-law continued, almost in disbelief. "You led 3 rescue extractions under heavy fire. You saved a downed pilot and 2 ground soldiers in an operation that nearly went sideways. That mission was studied in briefings for years. I never imagined I'd be sitting across from the person who did it." Every relative at that table was staring at me now, but not with doubt, with shock, with respect. Mark tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. I didn't know," he mumbled. "That's exactly the problem," my father-in-law said, his tone sharp now, aimed directly at his own son. "You didn't know because you never asked. You assumed. You judged her before you even gave her the chance to speak." That's not how a soldier thinks. That's how a coward thinks. The words hit hard. Mark, the man who spent years bragging about honor and respect, was being schooled on both by his own father in front of the entire family. For the rest of dinner, Mark barely said a word. He picked at his food, avoiding eye contact, clearly humiliated in front of the people he always tried so hard to impress. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth had already done all the work for me. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't yelling or arguing. It's simply letting people see who you really are and letting their own assumptions crumble under the weight of reality. My husband reached for my hand under the table and squeezed it gently.
He didn't need to say anything.
His eyes said it all.
Pride.
Relief. Maybe even a little bit of surprise, because even after years of marriage, there were parts of me he hadn't fully known. Later that night, as people started saying their goodbyes, my father-in-law pulled me aside. He looked at me with a kind of respect I hadn't seen from him before. "I'm sorry my son put you in that position," he said, "but I'm glad the truth came out. You should never have to prove yourself to anyone, especially not at a dinner table." I smiled. It's okay. Some people need to learn the hard way. Word spreads fast in families, especially juicy stories like this one. Within days, relatives who weren't even at the dinner had heard about what happened. Mark, once the family's proud symbol of military excellence, suddenly found himself the subject of jokes and gentle teasing whenever his name came up. At the next family gathering, an aunt jokingly asked him, "So, Mark, what's your call sign?" The table laughed, and Mark forced an awkward smile, clearly still recovering from the sting of that dinner. He never spoke down me again after that. In fact, over the following months, his attitude shifted entirely. He started asking me real questions about my service, genuinely curious instead of dismissive. It wasn't easy for him to admit he had been wrong, but slowly he did. One evening, months later, he approached me privately. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "I judged you without knowing anything about you. I let my own ego decide who you were before I ever gave you a chance." I appreciated the honesty. "Apology accepted," I said. We all have moments where pride gets in the way of respect. What matters is what we do after. That single dinner taught the entire family a lesson that no lecture ever could have. Respect isn't about rank or medals or how loudly you talk about your achievements. It's about how you treat people, especially those you assume have less to offer. Mark's transformation wasn't overnight, but it was real. He started mentoring younger officers differently, teaching them the importance of listening before judging. He often referenced that dinner as the moment that changed his perspective on assumptions and respect. As for me, I never felt the need to broadcast my achievements again. That night wasn't about proving myself to Mark or anyone else. It was simply about the truth finally being seen, without me having to force it. Looking back now, I realize something important. The loudest people in the room aren't always the strongest. Sometimes the quietest person at the table has carried the heaviest weight, fought the hardest battles, and earned the deepest respect, without ever needing to announce it. Real strength doesn't need applause. Real courage doesn't need a stage. And real character is revealed not in the moments we boast, but in the moments we choose humility, even when we have every reason to brag. If there's one thing that dinner taught our entire family, it's this. Never assume you know someone's story just by looking at them. You never know who you're really sitting across the table from. And sometimes, the most powerful response to disrespect isn't anger. It's simply the truth.